Okay. Well, good to see everybody. We are going to continue thinking about strange families in the Bible today, and specifically thinking about daughters. But first, let's open with prayer. Ukraine is very much on my mind. Are there other things on our minds that we want to remember in prayer?
That's definitely the big one.
Yeah.
Right. The weather when the people were cold. Yes.
Yeah.
It's been a tough month.
It's been a tough month. It has. Yeah. Are there other things we want to remember? Let us pray. Gracious God, we have descended once again into our warring madness. It seems never ending that your children cannot sort out our differences without violence. That we believe somehow that ending life and claiming territory will somehow bring what is good and right and just. We do not have answers. We cannot see clearly the path ahead. But we do know what is not your will. We have for too long tried to settle differences as adults. So teach us instead to come to your kingdom as children. Children who may be quick to temper, children who may shout in a rage, but who are also eager to laugh, quick to forget yesterday's spat, easy to forgive, eager to play, open, curious, hopeful. Grant us again the heart of a child. Teach us to set aside our quarrels and seek instead our common good. Grant us, O God, courage, that when justice calls for sacrifice, we will not step away from it. And let it not be just the sacrifice of young lives, the answer we default to too readily. Instead, teach us the sacrifice of higher gasoline prices. Teach us the sacrifice of inconvenience tied to supply lines. Teach us, O God, that some of the sacrifices that bring peace are the simple, everyday ones, not the grand gestures, not the sort of thing that leads to memorials. We have enough memorials to the war dead, O God. Teach us a better way. We remember especially today those who are without shelter, those who live in homes with paper-thin walls, those with roofs that leak. It has been a hard month, cold, wet, windy, icy. Gracious God, make us gracious toward our neighbors who need warmth, who need material resources to build warmth, who need homes, who need food, who need utility bills paid. Gracious God, teach us your grace. Be with us now, we pray, as we enter your holy word and seek truth amid all the strangeness amid all the ways your people have struggled and been confused and made mistakes, recorded their struggles, and invited us into the grand project of figuring out who you are and what you want for us and our strange families. Amen. Okay, so last time we were thinking about how parents, and primarily we were thinking about fathers, seek to build financial structures that protect daughters, right? So we looked at a bride price, and we looked at dowries. And we were thinking about how do families create these kinds of resources that protect a child, a daughter, from the potential capriciousness of a future spouse, right? And we saw that it's complicated in terms of which of these instruments are helpful and which of them are not, and what do they tell us about the place of women in the ancient world? Does that sound familiar? Is that what we talked about last time? Oh, good, because every once in a while I'll say to my students, I'm just reminding you where we were, and they're like, did we talk about that? Yes, and it's going to be on the exam too. Okay, so today I want to continue that trajectory and sort of think about how families constructed in the ancient world and how that's reflected in biblical text. And we're still thinking here primarily about daughters. And so the first text I want to point you to, we're going to jump around a little bit. Remember that the Bible has a lot of different authors. It's written in a lot of different times to a lot of different audiences. And so what we're trying to do is pull some different threads and say, what are the varieties of ways in which the people thought about the place of daughters in their midst? And so I want us to start with a strange one. This is going to be Exodus chapter 21, verse 7. Exodus 21, and let's say 7 through 11. First person to find it reads it. And here's the deal. If you come across a name of a place or a person and you don't know how to pronounce it, don't worry about it. I promise you, God does not care how we pronounce these things. In fact, we're not even completely sure how ancient Hebrew was pronounced, so you might mumble your way through it in exactly the way it would have been said. So what I do if I run across one I just can't figure out, I just take the first letter and I say that N guy, right? So try that. That makes it less intimidating to agree to read. Chapter 21, starting in verse 7.
When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. She'll have no right to sell her. Might want to pick up there?
He has no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt unfairly with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. And if he does not do these three things for her, she shall go out without debt, without payment of money.
Okay. What? Yeah, I always thought, like, this is not in the lectionary. That's right. I was thinking, if this were in the lectionary and we read it and you said the word of God for the people of God, would anybody earnestly respond? Thanks be to God. What do you think? What? Okay, what? What happens here?
So the father sells his daughter as a slave.
Let's just pause there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when a man sells his daughter as a slave, like you do. Think about that for just a minute. What's taken for granted there?
It's just an everyday occurrence.
Yeah, this happens. You do this. You sometimes you have to sell a daughter. It just happens. It still
After
happens.
the dowry, so you sell the daughter?
That's a good question. What would prompt you to sell a daughter into slavery? Why would you do that?
The book say to repay a debt.
To repay a debt, okay? And it may not even be a debt to the person you're selling the daughter to. It's poverty that drives people to sell daughters into slavery. It still does. If you look at international human trafficking, it's more often girls than boys being sold, and it's normally being sold by impoverished families. So it's still the case, right? So it's just taken for granted. This is a normal part of life. When you sell a daughter into slavery, then what's the next half of that sentence?
She shall not go out as the male slaves do.
She shall not go out as the male slaves do. Okay, how do the male slaves go out?
And they go to work?
They go to work. Okay, so when you sell a male slave, you're selling labor. When you sell a female slave, you are selling, when you sell your daughter, what are you doing?
Selling sex.
You're selling sex. Yeah, you are. And the person you sell her to has certain kind of obligations to her. What kind of obligations does the person you sell her to have?
You can't sell her to foreign people.
He can't turn around and sell her again, specifically to foreign people. Okay, what else?
He has to provide for her food, clothing.
He has to provide for her. She has to have shelter and food and clothing. Okay, what else?
Designates who she's going to belong to.
Designates who she will belong to. She's essentially being sold into marriage, right? And what obligations go along with that?
If he marries another one, she has to have the same standard of living.
Yeah, if he gets
So
tired of this one,
So she's a wife, automatically a wife,
she's kind of a wife, right?
kind of, or automatically a wife?
That's complicated. Definitely has the standing, at least, of something you would think of like a concubine, that she has certain kinds of marital rights. And marital rights mean you have the right of the protection of the household. You have the right of your material needs met, shelter, food, and clothing. And what other rights, what marital rights? There's something he can't deprive her. If he takes another wife, another woman, maybe he gets tired of this one, he's not allowed to cut her off from the protection of the household, not allowed to cut her off from her material protection, and not allowed to cut her off from something else.
The right to their children.
Yeah, she has marital rights too. And that means that he has to be with her physically or she can't have children, right? You know that works, right? Okay, right? So when it says she has these marital rights, she has the rights to bear children. So you remember where we left off last time with that really weird story about Jephthah's daughter? You remember that? What happened? Who's Jephthah? What did he do with his daughter?
He promised that he would sacrifice the first thing that came out of his house, and
Yeah.
it was his daughter.
Yeah.
And so she went to the hills for some time to mourn that she was going to be sacrificed, and not have any children.
That's right. So Jephthah's a general, and he prays, if you let me win this battle, I'll sacrifice to you whatever the first thing is that comes out of my home when I get home. And he gets home and his daughter's the first thing that comes out the door. So he has to sacrifice his daughter. And the point of the story that we were looking, I mean, like, oh, well, that's weird itself, right? But the piece of the story we were looking at was that his daughter makes a special request. I want to go into the hills with my friends and mourn the fact that I will never marry. She wants to mourn the fact that she will never marry because it means she won't have children. And if she doesn't have children, her life ends with her. Okay, as a woman without children, I find all kinds of things problematic about this construction of what makes a meaningful life. But in context, there's just no question that the meaning of a woman's life is to bear children. And that absent children, absent a kind of lineage, her life is meaningless. There's so many stories in the Bible where women are grieving being barren, right? And all of that is about, not just, I would love to be a mother, I want to have children, all of that is about the meaning of my life is connected to childbearing. So one of my favorite stories in that respect, remember Hannah, who goes to the temple and prays, and she ends up giving her son to the temple. When Hannah is grieving that she can't have children, her husband tries to comfort her by saying, "You're enough for me." I just think that's one of the most beautiful moments in the Bible. Now, of course, she ends up getting a miracle because that's how the Bible works. But there's a moment before that where her husband says, "You are enough for me." And we glide right over that. He's the most extraordinary man in the Bible, maybe. Okay, so she's mourning that she can't have children. You see that reflected here. When a man sells his daughter into slavery, she does not go out as a male slave. She doesn't go out as labor. She goes out, well, as a different kind of labor, right? She goes out as wife, sex slave, concubine. I'm not quite sure what to think of that status as, but in any case, she has certain kinds of rights in that relationship. Right to protection, right to material needs, right to bear children. So if he does wrong by her, takes another wife, he doesn't get to diminish her food or clothing or marital rights. And then if he does not do these three things for her, she shall go out without debt, without payment of money. What does that mean?
She's free.
She's free. And the debt is written clean, right? She doesn't owe whatever it was. She was sold to pay off a debt, and that debt is not owed if she leaves this guy because he had obligations to her. Okay, just reflect for me a minute about when you say this is the word of God for the people of God, are you feeling like saying thanks be to God? What are you thinking now?
If you're Mormon, it's pretty good stuff.
That's interesting, and I don't know how to respond.
Well, have you watched Big Love?
I have.
I don't know, it's just, I was just thinking about it from that perspective. I mean, they could say this is the word of God, and they might say hallelujah.
Yeah, it's also, there's a little protection built in here,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there is.
Yeah, if you take for granted that you live in a polygamous society, right? And men just take on extra wives. If you've got enough wealth, you can do that. You're allowed, right? If you can provide for the women, you can provide for the children, and it's kind of a mark of your status in society that you can do that. Okay, let's take for granted that's not a great world to live in, but that's the world you're in. You're also in a world where people demand, payment of debt. There's not a bankruptcy provision. There actually is in the Bible, but forget that for a minute. In most contexts, there's not a bankruptcy provision. And so what are you going to do? You're in a situation in which this is a norm. At the very least, you can build some protections in for the woman, more likely girl, who's being sold in that context, right? So in a way, the good news of this text is it's saying, this is the world we live in. Given the context we're in, and that we don't have a magic wand to make those structures disappear, at the very least, can we build in some protection so that the girl who is sold into slavery has her material needs met, is protected, is able to have children. And if the person she's sold to doesn't provide those things, she has the right to walk away and the debt is canceled, right? Okay, that's not so bad after all, right? I mean, I don't want to live in that world, but if I did, I would at least want this kind of protection in place. Okay, so keeping that in mind, let's move backward in text to Genesis 38. Now, on the order of weird biblical families, this is one of the weirdest. And we've done this text together before, and I'm confident that you remember every detail of it. So I don't want to linger in every tiny detail, but I do want us to notice some things going on in this story. This is the story of Judah and Tamar. Okay. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adulamite whose name was Hirah. There, Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He married her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Again, she conceived and bore a son, whom she named Onan. I have associations with the name Onan. Yeah. Yeah. Did any of you like grow up with this, the sin of Onan? Onanism. It's very old. It's before my time. Nobody talked about Onan when I was a kid. But kind of a, is that people associations with Onan? Yeah, his sin was that he spilled his seed upon the ground. Now, traditionally in Christianity, this turned into one of the weirdest interpretations ever. And the interpretation was that a man should not, I know it's Sunday school, but some things have to be said. So I'm talking to Zoom people in case you're not used to me. Everybody here's used to me enough, you know what's coming, right? Like a man is not supposed to spill his seed anywhere that is not potentially reproductive, right? So on that logic, better to go with a prostitute than to masturbate. The sin of Onan was that he didn't do this in a way that could produce a child. I'm not at the college, I can restrain myself a little bit. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It seems to have been, I feel like it's the woman's fault if there's no child.
Yeah.
But this is acknowledging that the man does have something to do with it.
Yeah, like she's understood to be the field, and he's the one who plants the seed. And so if he doesn't put the seed in the field, you can't grow a crop. This is weird. Like this is just weird logic. It does mean that they didn't actually, I mean, they didn't know about genetics, right? But they didn't really think that women contributed anything genetically to the next generation. So I don't know how they accounted for the fact that children look like their mothers too, but you know, they didn't think that the woman contributed anything. She was just kind of like the incubator. And yet, so it meant that her field wasn't fertile with bad soil. It's never the man's fault. So yet again, she bore a son. We're going to skip for a while. Verse 6, Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. Okay, so this is Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar. Everybody with me? Okay. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of Yahweh, and Yahweh put him to death. This is the yada, yada, yada part of the story. Like, I don't know what happened. Apparently, this doesn't matter to us, but is now out of the picture. So I always want to know, like, what do you do? But apparently, this is none of my business. Then Judah said to Onan, ready? Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother. What? What's the rule here? There, marriage. Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, it means if you're the woman or that his brother has a responsibility. Woman's name will die, his brother's name.
Yeah, if your older, well, actually any of your brothers dies before having children, you're responsible for having children with his wife so that he has descendants. The children are not your children. The children are the descendants of your brother. What's the point of that? Inheritance, right? You're thinking about a period in which land is the form of wealth. So if your brother doesn't have offspring, you're not dividing the land, right? It's a way of amassing wealth. So like you would have a financial interest. interest in killing off your brothers before they have kids. Because you're going to accumulate more land if you do that. But if you have a moral obligation to have children with your sister-in-law, can we just go ick for a minute? Then you aren't able to consolidate wealth, right? So it's an economic provision. It's a weird one. It's an economic provision to discourage consolidation of wealth, right? They're trying to keep the wealth spread evenly throughout the community and not have increasing what haves and have-nots, right? So Onan has a financial interest in making sure that Tamar is barren. So since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of Yahweh, and he put him to death also. Judah is not having good luck with sons. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," for he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. I'm hoping that kid is not too young, because I'm not clear that Judah understands that there's like a time limit on how long a woman is able to bear children. Like, just wait until this one grows up. Okay. Tamar seems to be thinking in these terms, though. So, in the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah's time to mourn was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to shear his sheep," that's not a metaphor for anything. She put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance to, I think I said Enay, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. The assumptions built into the world. His wife died. He's going to shear his sheep. He stops at the town on the way. There's a prostitute at the gate. And, right, like, this is just normal. This is the world. There's not a sense here that there's no indication of a moral problem with Judah doing this. I mean, Yahweh's killing off his kids for being sinful and doesn't seem to have an issue with this at all, right? This kind of a normal part of the world. You're on a business trip and you make use of the services of a prostitute. So he hires this prostitute and she says, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" And he answered, "I will give you a kid from the flock." And she said, "Only if you give me a pledge until you send it." Okay, a little business negotiation here. What's the issue?
I cheat her.
You might cheat her, right? He says, "Oh, I'll pay you when I'm on the way back." Right? I'll get one of the lambs or this kid here and I'll bring it back. And she's like,
But it's born, and he was born it for
right. "I'm not sure I trust you on this. What are you going to give me so that I know you're going to come back and pay me what you owe me?" And he gives her. You all know your Bible stories well, and if we haven't read it, what does he give her? Yeah. Yeah. So give me your signet and your cord and the staff that's in your hand. So he gave them to her, and he went to her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and went away, taking off her veil, and she put on the garments of widowhood. So end of the story, verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the whore. Moreover, she's pregnant as a result of whoredom." And Judah said, "Bring her out, let her be burned." Wait, what? What are the assumptions here? she's the guilty party. She played the war, and so she should be punished, burned to death, right? And is anybody else thinking, but psst, Judah, you did that too, right? Like, he just did that 3 months ago. Double standard, right? Why is the double standard so important? I mean, there's a logic here.
With purity of your mind.
Hmm?
For the purity of your mind.
That's right. The logic here is that men don't have babies, right? Their sexual fidelity doesn't in any way imperil the family line. But the men need to be sure that the child the woman is bearing is their own. And so women don't have that kind of sexual freedom that men do. I mean, the simple logic here is that no woman ever gave birth and then said, I wonder if that's my kid or not, right? But men worry about those sorts of things. And so the restrictions on women's sexual expression are much tighter. So she's going to be burned at the stake. So clever Tamar, as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law. It was the owner of these who made me pregnant. And she said, take note, please, whose these are, the signet and cord and the staff. Then Judah acknowledged them and said, she is more right than I, since I did not give her to my son, and he did not lie with her. Okay, so she's rewarded for being clever, for tricking her father-in-law into hiring her as a prostitute. I think this is an interesting social assumption that her cleverness is to be rewarded. There's lots of that in Genesis, lots of people tricking each other and getting rewarded for it. So she's showing that she gets the logic of this society, and she gets what she deserves, which is a child of Judah's line. So now Judah's son, has a child who is both the son and the grandson of Judah. Right? Okay. Now, follow the logic. Back to where we started. We started with Jephthah's daughter, who is mourning the fact that she won't have children. We went to selling your daughter into slavery, who is protected not only materially, but also in terms of lineage. She is entitled to have children. And here we have Tamar. Connect the dots for a minute, like you do that. What are you hearing about the status of women in the place of daughters? I think I asked something too easy. We've covered it, just like pull the points out.
Their property, and it's all about bearing son for inheritance and control of land and power.
Okay, marriage is economic, right? That's an important piece of it. I'm not sure if I would say the daughters are property, but they do have some qualities of property. They can be sold.
Can be sold.
Yeah, sons can be sold too. So that's complicated. So you've got that they are exchangeable, like they can be sold. You've got that the marriage itself is economic. What else?
Kind of weirdly, the marriage lasts longer than some of the people involved in the marriage does. Both of her husbands are dead, and she's still on the hook
Yeah,
to be faithful to these dead guys.
the marriage survives death. Yeah, at least until there's an heir. After that, she might be free to marry again. But yeah, at least until there's an heir, she's still on the hook for her obligation in that marriage. Okay, what else?
So she's under obligation to that marriage until she bears a child.
Right.
But once she bears a child, is she?
I do not know the answer to that question.
And it's probably a male child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't even count the female children. You like when we hear about Jacob's sons, it's the 12 And every once in a while, they let you know that by saying that all the people should gather and the women need to stay away, because the women aren't the people, right? So yeah, the daughters aren't counted. It means bear a son, right? Okay, what else? And by the way, I'm not totally clear what happens after you've born a son. Are you free? Are you, I'm not clear on that. We need Steve McKenzie here. He would know.
Yeah, after she has twins, both boys, and then we go back to the story of Joseph. They don't show up again in what?
That's right. Because,
Well, they show up in numbers.
yeah, but why doesn't Tamar show up again? Like, why?
Because part of the story's over.
Her part of the story is over, right? Her part of the story is to bear children. That's her job, to continue the line. Once she's done that, it's like happily ever after. Her story's over. You don't need to know anything else about Tamar. You only need to know that she bore children. So we're getting a kind of like, in spite of the fact that we've got multiple narratives here that are getting different pieces of the puzzle, all of them are pointing to one central reality, that the purpose of a woman's life is to bear children, right? Okay. And even to the, now I'm lost. Where was I supposed to go from here? Oh, now we're going to disrupt that narrative a little bit. Go to Numbers 36, starting in verse 5. We don't read the book of Numbers often enough. There's all kinds of really fascinating, by which I mean weird stuff in here.
Balaam's ass.
Yeah, that's Numbers, right?
I've been trying to get every preacher I know to preach on, nobody will ever preach on.
Oh, man. See, that's like the kind of text that calls to my soul.
It's a great story.
What is this? There's also the fantastic one where the people are begging for something other than manna to eat. And God gets so frustrated that says, I'll give you, what's the bird?
Quail.
Quail. I will give you quails. And how do you know that? That's fascinating. Your mind is fascinating. Yeah, I'll give you quails until they are shooting out of your nose. Like he says, like you're basically vomiting quail out of your nostrils. That's how, so there's some really great stuff in Numbers. All right.
If you like quail.
Yeah. I mean, I love that sort of detail, that somebody was clearly very frustrated with people to come up with that particular image. Okay. There are lots of names in this section that are hard to pronounce. Remember, you can say that Z guy. Can somebody read 5 through 11?
On 35 or 36.
Chapter 36, starting in verse 5, going through 11.
Then Moses commanded the Israelites according to the word of the Lord, saying, the descendants of the tribe of Joseph are right in what they are saying. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them marry whom they think best, only it must be into a clan of their father's tribe that they are married, so that no inheritance of the Israelites shall be transferred from one tribe to another. For all Israelites shall retain the inheritance of their ancestral tribes. Every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the Israelites shall marry one from the clan of her father's tribe, so that all Israelites may continue to possess their ancestral inheritance. No inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another, for each of the tribes of the Israelites shall retain its own inheritance. The daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Bala, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, the daughters of Zelophehad, married sons of their father's brothers.
Okay. You don't know what happened previous in the story, but don't worry about that yet. We'll go backward in a minute. What so far are you hearing?
We're protecting our inheritance
How?
by marrying within our clan.
Okay. The daughters of Zelophehad are not allowed to marry outside of the tribe. What would the effect be if they married outside of the tribe?
Well, their children would have a claim on the property that, or the inheritance within the tribal.
The husband's tribe would have claim there.
Yeah, you could get a concentration of wealth in one tribe over another.
Well, and these, you're gonna explain the backstory, but these women have their own land.
That's the fascinating thing in this
And
story.
so they need, if they go marry somebody from some other tribe, those other guys are gonna get this land that belongs to this tribe,
Yeah.
and that's a problem.
Here's the thing about this story that's different. Normally, it's not a problem to marry out of your tribe. You just become part of your husband's household, and the inheritance continues in that tribe. And a woman from another tribe who marries into this one becomes part of this tribe, and the children inherit intra-tribally, right? This story is creating a solution to a problem that exists when a man doesn't have any sons. So you notice the assumption here, which Daniel has picked up on, the assumption here is that these daughters have some land. Normally that would never happen. So let's go backward for just a minute and see what happened. Start at the beginning of 36. The heads of the ancestral houses of the clans of the descendants of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, of the Josephite clans, came forward and spoke in the presence of Moses and the leaders, the heads of the ancestral houses of the Israelites. They said, Yahweh commanded my Lord to give the land for inheritance by lot to the Israelites. And my Lord was commanded by Yahweh to give the inheritance of our brother Zelophehad to his daughters. But if they, oh, I haven't gone backward far enough. Where the heck is the beginning of this story? Shoot, I pointed you to the wrong place. I don't know numbers as well as I thought I
Oh,
did.
it's 27.
Thank you. There it is. And I should have known because it is all marked up.
The dollars up.
Right. Okay.
27.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. By the way, it really, really bugs me that this is called the story of the daughters of Zelophehad. The Bible doesn't call it that. The Bible doesn't have headings. The Bible doesn't have chapters and verses. The way we divide the Bible up into chapters and verses is a modern convention, and certainly the footers that name these stories, those are completely modern. The editors of the New Oxford Annotated Bible decided to call this the Daughters of Zelophehad. This really bothers me because they have names. It's very unusual, but we know the names of Zelophehad's daughters, and they are really the central players in this story. All Zelophehad does is die, right? Like that's his point in the plot. They're the ones who drive the action here. So, chapter 27. Then the daughters of Zelophehad came forward. He was the son of, let's go down here. Here are their names: Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. I read that once. I preached this in church, and somebody said to me, they sound like Klingons. And no, the Klingons sound like Hebrew daughters, right? But no, they do sound Klingon. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and said, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against Yahweh in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers. Give to us a possession among our father's brothers. Tease out some of the assumptions there.
If he had some sons, the sons would have gotten whatever his land was going to be. He
Yeah.
doesn't have any sons because he got smited for undisclosed reasons.
But it's for his own sin,
Yes,
right? It's not
right.
for,
It's not for this other thing
right.
where, anyway, but so, hey, they ask for his share to be
Yeah.
divided among them.
Yeah, so clearly there's some kind of assumption here that there's been some kind of sedition. And the people who smited, like King James, right? The people who were smited, smited, whatever, the people who were killed by God for that, nobody has any sympathy for whether their family names carry on, right? But the daughters, they're mounting a legal argument here. They're saying our dad didn't die as part of that sedition, so there's no reason to wipe out his line, right? If you think about what they're doing here is they're building a kind of, they're building a case based on precedent. He has the right, God said we're going to divide this land by lottery. It's everybody gets something. And he died for his own sin, not for this big thing that happened, whatever that was. Whatever that was apparently rules people out from inheritance, right? But he wasn't part of that. He was just, whatever doofus he was. He died for his own sin. So he shouldn't be wiped out. So don't divide his land between our uncles. His lineage should continue, but he doesn't have a son to continue it. So we need to have sons so that our father's descendants can inherit, right? They're making an argument for inheritance for women as, is there a term for holding property for somebody else?
Trustee.
A trustee, thank you. I figured I should have known that. Okay, trustee, right? They're kind of arguing, look, we know we're women and we can't own property ourselves, but could we be a trustee for an as yet to be determined future descendant? Can you be a trustee for somebody who doesn't exist yet?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think you can.
Well, you can here. Okay.
A new rule.
That's right. So Moses brought their case before Yahweh, and Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, the daughters of Zlatan had a right in saying, you shall let them have the inheritance, and so forth. Verse 8, you shall say to the Israelites. Now notice you've got the specific case, and now we're going to make a rule that applies to future cases. This is how law works, right? You're building up precedents. This has never happened before. We don't know what to do about it. Now that it's happened, we make a rule, and next time it happens, we'll know what to do. So if a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance on to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you shall give him his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, you shall give his inheritance to the nearest kinsman of his clan, and he shall possess it. It shall be for the Israelites a statute and an ordinance as Yahweh commanded Moses. Okay, what's the logic there?
You gotta keep it in the tribe, and so we're gonna have a rule of who inherits what as close to the family as possible.
Yep, you keep it in the tribe. And so you keep tracing back through the male lineage until you get somebody who can inherit. So dad didn't have any sons. If the daughters don't end up having sons, they get distributed to the uncles. If the father didn't have any brothers, in other words, there are no uncles, you go back to the grandfather and great uncles. If there aren't any, that you keep going backward until you find a male descendant of that tribe who can inherit. And whatever he inherits and whatever children he has, eventually you push it back down the line so that this guy's name continues, right? But notice the economic logic. It's not just about making sure that the man's name continues. There's an economic logic here. You don't want that wealth to end up being controlled by another tribe. The goal is to keep equity. You don't want great concentrations of wealth. When you get great concentrations of wealth, you're going to get inequitable relationships among the tribes, and some of the tribes are going to end up absorbing and governing other tribes, but God intended parity between the 12, right? So what you see here, this tells you something about ancient Israel, doesn't it? What are you hearing?
Well, they have a sense of how peace can be kept if tribes aren't jealous of each other.
Peace can be kept if tribes aren't jealous of each other. So having resources concentrated in the hands of a few is going to create resentments and problems. That is still true.
Kind of like what we have today.
Yeah, gosh, that's shocking, isn't it? There's something else though you're hearing. Because remember when this is written? When is it written down? Do you know who wrote Numbers? Yeah.
Well, there's only like 3 guesses. It's probably exile.
Yep.
Okay,
Like, that's
so,
always the
'cause
safe
it's-
guess.
Well, it's set, they don't even have any land.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't even have land yet. This story is set in a period before they've inherited the promised land, right?
Okay.
And they're already having disputes to make sure that nobody gets more than anybody else, right? So this is a story that's passed down through generations, and it's clearly part of what is being disputed under the United Monarchy. And it's further being recorded in exile. And so one thing we're kind of figuring out here is that between the period of United Monarchy, let's say 10th century and forward, up until exile, 6th century, one of the central political questions of Israel is how do the 12 relate to the 1, right? We got a question here of federal power versus states' rights. Remember, Israel went from being a confederation of 12 tribes. That's what's going on in the book of Joshua and Judges, right? It goes from a confederation of 12 tribes to being a united monarchy. And now the question is, does the united monarchy kind of overrule the 12-ness of Israel? Is America predominantly 50 or is it predominantly 1? You got a similar kind of tension here. Does the tribe of Benjamin have the right to tell the tribe of Judah what its business is? The power dynamic is actually the opposite of that, right? This is a who's the boss of who kind of question. And what they're sorting out here is that the political independence of the tribes is connected to their economic independence. If you become economically subordinate to another tribe, you also get absorbed politically. Make sense? I mean, my goodness, look what we're thinking about right now in terms of energy independence. How much is that question of energy independence at the heart of what's happening in the Ukraine right now? Think about the kind of tensions in Europe associated with that pipeline. These are still, these questions about how material resources get distributed and who has power over who, political power and economic power are still connected. And so you read the Bible and remember that it's still a human world. It might be ancient, it might be weird, they might not have electricity, but it's still a human world, and you can read the flow of power. You can read the economic dynamics there and figure out what's going on. This isn't just an argument about what are we going to do with these 5 women whose father has died and they don't have a brother. We're also thinking about how do family relationships connect to economic power, and what does that tell us about the political status of individual tribes? What they're really worried about here. What will these women inherit? And then what happens when they get married? And so 5 or 6 chapters later, whenever that was, we find them confronting that exact question. The daughters have inherited on their father's behalf. Now the time is to get married. And they're being given permission to choose their own spouses. That's pretty extraordinary. They're giving permission to choose their own spouses, but they're being restricted. It has to be somebody from this tribe, right? Okay, reel all that back in again and go back to the question we're asking about, what are you hearing about status of daughters, status of women? Does this modify anything we've had so far?
These women have power.
Say again?
These women have power.
Okay, they've got some power. They're exercising agency on their own behalf. We saw that with Tamar too. She has the right to certain things, by golly, and she will go and get them. These daughters too. They've got some capacity to engage. Okay, what else? Anything else? You were gonna say something was modified by this?
Yeah, it's, you know, if sound terrible. You know, they're not as good as sons, but if you don't have any sons, you're still okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really unfortunate if you don't have sons, but, daughters are good for something, right? Kind of a placeholder.
Well, you
Right.
still get to keep it in the tribe.
You still get to keep it in the tribe, right?
I mean, you can go to your rest knowing that at least it's gonna stay in the tribe, even if it has to go to the daughters.
That's right.
And they're buying into this whole thing too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not
Okay.
fighting against.
What they're doing is working within the system they have,
Yeah.
right? And notice these are legal structures, right? They have to build based on case law. And case law says our father didn't do the kind of thing that means he deserves to have his line wiped out, so we have to honor that. And, right, they're building up precedent.
They got God to command Moses that they were,
Yeah.
that they should inherit this land.
It made it all the way to the Supreme Court. I mean, that is what this means. If it gets all the way to the level where Moses has to ask God, right? That is the equivalent of the Supreme Court. Yeah.
Okay, there are that many daughters, so is the inheritance based on, if each one of them has a son, do they each get just 1/5 or 1/6 or whatever it is? Of the
I
inheritance, or
cannot-
does the
yeah.
firstborn
First-
son become the?
First, I cannot tell you how grateful I am, but the story ends before we get to that. Second, I'm assuming it would work based on inheritance law as though there had been 5 brothers. I think that's the way that would work.
So
But-
that, the one brother's inheritance would be divided among all of them.
No.
I don't know.
Or mine just gone to the older daughter.
Yeah, I don't know. If the
And if
assumption
one
is.
daughter had a son and the others didn't have sons, then that son would get the whole half.
I think what we do in the United
Okay.
States, if you don't have a will, is it gets divided up more
Yeah,
or less equally, and then however many sons each daughter has, that divides up their 1/5 of it, or whatever their portion is.
Yeah.
Nobody's like jumping to another one unless they don't have any kids.
okay, what all of this points us to is how really much simpler this would be if the women were just their own people. Right? I mean, this gets really complicated. And the story ends before we get to that. And you almost get the feeling like, this is the rule, don't ask any more questions, right? But all of it becomes so incredibly complicated, partly because the women aren't their own people. They don't stand for themselves. If they did, if this were 5 sons, you'd have a much simpler inheritance mechanism. Yeah.
Okay, I always thought when you did this, I know when you marry cousins, you tend to have either brilliant people or idiots or problems, and, you know.
That happens anyway.
So I always thought this was real funny that they did this because.
Yeah, I mean, it would encourage inbreeding. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's this chart that goes around on social media periodically about how if one person has 2 parents and 4 grandparents and they keep expanding until you end up with essentially more human beings than have ever existed in the history of the earth. I think people don't understand how very, very inbred the human species is. Like if something like 40% of Europeans are direct descendants of Charlemagne. This is partly because, you know, Charlemagne's heirs survived and the peasants didn't, but still, that's a lot of, you know, that's a lot. Okay, yeah. Boy, if we were at Rhodes, I would say your tuition dollars did not pay for that. That was Charlemagne was not part of this lesson. Okay. So we are at time when you need to go to worship. Let me just set you up for next time. We were going to do this time, but we never get as far as I think I'm going to. For class next time, read all of the book of Ruth. Am I here next week? I am. Okay, good. Because otherwise, I'm taking over. Read the entire book of Ruth. It won't hurt you. It's only like 4 chapters long. And think all the things you've learned so far about babies and women and daughters. Keep all of that in mind and read the book of Ruth through that lens. Think about Onan, think about all of it. And just to make this really, really fun, when you're reading the book of Ruth and you come to chapter 3, I want you to keep in mind that in the Bible, feet, the term feet is a circumlocution for genitals. So just read it that way. All right, I'll see you next time.
Kendra, we studied the book and horizons.